to another episode, 52 Authors, 52 Weeks. I am joined by the Barbara J. Hunt, author of Forgiveness Made Easy, the revolutionary guide to moving beyond your past. And this is my favorite part, truly letting go. How are you today?
I'm really well, thank you. Really well, thanks, Dr. Lisa.
So let's talk about the how. How did this book come to be?
Well, it's quite a long story because I was brought up in the Catholic faith. So there was always an element of forgiveness in my spiritual upbringing. And then I got very interested in personal and spiritual development. And so I was curious about how do we become better human beings? How do we fulfill our potential? And what's on the other side of, all of the old patterns and stuff that we grow up with that we want to get over, all of the self-sabotaging material. And I had the great joy and privilege of joining something called the More to Life program. And they did do a teaching that was very interesting about forgiveness. And so that kind of introduced me to the idea of forgiveness as a practice. And then fast forward, another years, and I was working as a coach and a mentor, and I was really interested in why do we find forgiveness so hard. And I was working on a retreat where we would have people coming to do some juice fasting and some deep emotional work, and they'd be with us for about a week. And I was watching what would happen. Some clients would seem to be able to find it fairly easy or easy-ish to forgive something. Other clients would find it really difficult. And there wasn't a correlation between the thing that had happened and their ability to forgive. So that kind of got me very curious about it. And then I started thinking about it, and I was doing a bit of writing at that time. And 5 of the pieces that I wrote were about forgiveness. And I was just like, this is such a fascinating topic. And it's great if you have a faith and it's already in your faith, but what for people if they don't have a faith? I was seeing it as a secular ethics practice or a mental and emotional health practice. And then I was looking at the potential of it, because what would happen was we do some forgiveness work with these clients, and they would say things like, all of that bad feeling that I've been carrying in my heart for 50 years, sometimes gone. And although the juicing was wonderful, we think it was the emotional work that was actually really helping people to do what you were saying at the beginning, to truly let go. And so I got really, really curious, and I was looking at all the different models available of forgiveness. Why do people find it hard? There's lots of writing about forgiveness, and some of it is about faith. And that doesn't apply to people who don't have a faith. I was wanting to make something accessible, which was why I ended up writing a book called Forgiveness Made Easy, even though probably the true title should be Made Easier, but doesn't have quite the same ring, because I don't think it ever is easy per se. But if you follow what happens in the book, and the book helps to undo the 5 major obstacles to forgiveness. And it also gives a method so that you can forgive somebody as a practice. And that might be something that you can do by yourself or with a friend or a mentor or a coach or somebody like me who actually helps people to do that work. So that's the story, really. So quite a long journey with forgiveness, which continues to this day.
And you know what? Whether we all want to realize it or not, we have someone or something that we need to forgive so that we can move on. And what I have found, I'm a growth coach and I'm a healthcare professional by trade. But what I've found is that we allow things, people, situations, our past to hold us hostage, and it prevents us from moving forward. So I like the concept of juicing. You got to tell me more about this juicing, this week experience with juicing, and I'm assuming there's some meditation and all of that takes place. That's actually something that's on my list to do. Not necessarily that I think I need to forgive anyone, because I'm so laser focused on the future that the past is in my rearview mirror for a reason. And so I don't consciously think there's anything or anyone that I have not forgiven. But that's definitely something that I want to do as I continue in my own personal journey towards daily peace. My grandfather, who is 103 years old, I asked him, how do you live so long? And he said very simply, Number one, you have to trust God. You have to know God. And I know that God is not for everyone, but that's just, my grandfather's belief and mine at 103, right? I mean, at 50, I'm like, maybe I can get to 103, right? But he talks about treating everyone with kindness and love. And I think that's so important. But I also think it's difficult because you can't give what you haven't been given because you don't have an example. Sometimes it's just difficult because you don't know what it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah.
So chapter 2, you talk about forgiveness is for you. And I think that's such a powerful statement because a lot of people think I'm going to forgive, I'm not going to forget. And, it's just all these, I would say, stigmas around hurt, pain, forgiveness. So tell us a little bit about forgiveness is for you.
Yeah. Well, even before that, if I'd love to share the definition of forgiveness that I use in my book, because that helps to really clarify what I'm meaning. And I learned this on my original training with K. Bradford Brown. And he said that forgiveness is the absolute refusal to hold ill will against someone for what they did or didn't do. And I like to sort of show it as in, this is like our collection of the ill will. There's all these bits that people do. They, like this, the little grudges and gripes and grievances, and the bigger stuff, kind of like, so we're holding the ill will, and often we're not aware of it, or like you say, we move on, we go to the past, but actually sometimes something in the present will point us backwards, like you're still holding. And so the absolute refusal looks like this, and the way it's for you is you're the one who's free. You're the one who's not holding it anymore. You're the one who's decided, I don't want to carry this burden in my heart. I want to live to 103. I want to be a free human being. And there's lots of different sayings about resentment, and it said that one of my favorites is holding on to resentment is like setting yourself on fire and hoping the other person is bothered by the smoke. And you get that sense that you're the one who's thinking about them next Tuesday. You're the one who's waking up the following Friday. You're the one who's kind of like contracted and you have all this tension in your body. And as a health practitioner, you'll know you can create like illness in the body, high cortisol levels, high blood pressure. And there have even been studies done about forgiveness and the impact on heart health and even the progression of melanoma, cancer of the skin. Amazing potential for us to do our inner work. And I really feel that we're a bit oblivious. We take our bins out, we maybe we do our recycling, but and it gets collected and it takes off wherever it goes, but we don't do that with our hearts. And occasionally life sends us challenging circumstances where we're forced into getting support one way or the other, either through our spiritual lives or through our therapy, or physically sometimes we need the support of other people to help us work through things that have physically happened. But that's why I like thinking about forgiveness as a practice, as a mental health practice. Just like meditation is much more popular than it used to be. We expect, we know we need to do a bit of exercise, but what about the heart? How do we free our hearts? And that's why it's for you, because you live with your heart. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. One of the things that popped into my mind is that sometimes we allow others and things to take up real estate in our mind, in our soul, in our spirit. And that's a heavy burden to carry. I have this saying that I've trademarked called shed the weight that's holding you hostage. And, in the medical community, and I'm not a physician, my background is healthcare administration, but we talk about body mass index. But what about all the indexes that are holding us down that we don't want to acknowledge? And I think there's this stigma associated with therapy. Everybody needs a therapist. When I grew up, I think we were taught, turn it over to Jesus and it'll be all right? Which,
Mm-hmm.
I believe in the power of prayer, but I believe in a therapist, because you need someone that has been trained in the art and the science of therapy, the techniques that are used that a prescription, a medication can't do, right? And so I want to just say that because I think there are some folks think therapy is a sign of weakness, right? So if you go to the therapist, you're weak. There's something wrong with you. You're crazy. And I think we just allow others to define how we're going to move forward, how we're going to respond to situation. And I just have a question, because this is not my area of expertise. In chapter 3, you talk about these cognitive biases, how does that impact how someone will move in the forgiveness space?
Great question. Some of the cognitive biases are just, it's like that's a nice scientific way of saying you're lying to yourself or you're making up a story about something. So if something happens, you walk into a room and somebody you love turns their back on you, you're going to make it mean something. Like they're ignoring me, they're on their phone, I've annoyed them, like we have these, and the biases can not just be the story, but the biases are ways of thinking. So one of our cognitive biases that we have as human beings is we tend to think about the negative. We err towards that because if you think about our history, anthropologically, you don't want to be thinking, oh, it's probably just a stick and stand on it when it might be a snake. You're much better off and more likely to survive if you're thinking, oh, it's probably a snake, better be careful. So we have this tendency to over dramatize, which, we can see in all of our culture and our media. So there are particular ways that we think about things. And we do lie to ourselves about some things, like if someone owes you money, you're more likely to round it up. But if you owe someone money, you're more likely to round it down. even simple things like that. And we also have, so if there's something that we think is true and right, we'll look for proof of it. So we have confirmation bias. So those are the kinds of things. And that happens in regard to the people that we need to forgive, because we'll add, well, they did that, but they also did that. And then that was that time when they did that as well. And so we're storing up the things that prove why I should be holding on to my resentment because they did that thing. So that's kind of how it works.
I love it. So before we got on to do the recording, one of the things I mentioned to you was that I am so honored, blessed that I put out this call, right, for 52 authors, 52 weeks. And then I also mentioned to you that one of my goals is to perhaps reach and interview authors that are, let's just say, well-known in certain areas. And one of them is Ryan Holiday, who wrote the book, Ego is the Enemy. And so love the book. But in your book, chapter 5, you talk about ego. So what would you say to our listening, viewing audience as it relates to forgiveness and ego and how they can move forward?
Yeah. Well, ego is always in there when it's something that we're needing to forgive. And just to say, when I first was invited to think about the people I needed to forgive, I really lowered my bar and thought, well, probably everyone I've ever met. So although there's a lot in the past that I could have gone back to, I kind of I took on board, maybe if I think of forgiveness as a practice, there's a way of releasing all of the old material. But you really see that your ego is in there, because when something happens, we like to, and we even have a phrase, I want to get even. Something happens, a bad thing, and we feel like we need to do something to make it even. And some of that is either we want the other person to apologize or to acknowledge what they've done, or we want to get back at them. We want them to feel like we felt. And it's really interesting. And if you think about it, just the way kids behave, you thump your brother thumps you, you thump him back, he thumps you. This is, what happens with wars. But then parents come in and go, enough. They separate you. But there's that sense of tit for tat. And choosing to forgive somebody is having that, but not then retaliating or seeking revenge or doing something back. And that is really hard. And that's why it's, if you have a faith, it is the master spiritual practice, because it's so hard, because everything in us is going, do it back to them so they know what it feels like. And so the ego is in there. The ego is the arbiter of well, where am I in any social situation? Am I an underdog here? Am I, we have different interpretations of where we fit in any group of people. And, whatever you say about, class or, income, or we have an inner kind of, sometimes we know that we're a worthy human being, but if we don't have all the apparent wealth of, that everybody else has in the Western world, then we think somehow that we're doing something wrong, or, so there is this weird sort of internal judging that we're doing all the time. And that's really where forgiveness, where resentment builds up, is wanting things to be different from the way they are. And what happens when we can't right the wrong and we choose to forgive? That is the most powerful act, because we're actually choosing to not get revenge or to take, have ill will against somebody. We're choosing just to hold our hearts open to the pain that happened. And the ego doesn't like to do that. It wants to have one-upmanship. So the resentment can feel like, oh, I've got power, I've got something, I've got a shield, I've got a story, I've got a list of all the things you did, you've got this sort of sense of you've got something when you've got your resentment. So when you put your resentment down, I mean, what you actually have is way more powerful and potent, which is your peace of mind and your freedom, because you're not hooked in. When somebody's done something, we're like Velcro, we hook on. Whereas if you choose to forgive, you're like Teflon. It's like, it doesn't matter what the other person's doing, you're just letting it go. And so the ego is very much in there. The games we play, we like the moral high ground, we like to be right, we like to justify. If that person did this, we can tell our friend, oh, you never guess what she did next. And there's a part of us that gets off on that sort of, and that's all our egoic behavior. That's not our true nature, which is to recognize, here is another human being who's not perfect, just like me. And, here we are trying to do the best we can, and everyone makes mistakes. Just one other thing to say about that is, one of the things that's very hard about forgiveness is if you feel like you need some kind of recognition of the misdemeanor, like somebody needs to tell you, I'm sorry for that. That makes it very hard if the other person has died or they're no longer in your life. Then you're just waiting for something to kind of meet that. I sort of take that into account in the way I process with people. But it's a really important point, is that you may be waiting forever for an apology. So you don't wait. That's the whole thing about doing forgiveness practice, is that you're not waiting. It's not dependent on whether or not the other person does anything. It's just you choosing. And it isn't easy. It's hard.
Oh my gosh. So one thing I want to tell you publicly is, after reading your book, I had to forgive some people. And the people who I had to forgive are the people who told me, who tell me that I can't do something, because I've spent my entire life proving them wrong. And in fact, I use it as ammunition, like, oh, you tell me I can't do XYZ? Oh, no is not an acceptable answer for me. I am going to do the thing. But I realized that I need to forgive them, right? Was so focused on what they were telling me I could not do. And that's energy I could have used to doing the things that I was doing, right? So as I was reading, I was like, self, you have to have a conversation with yourself. I said, self, it's time to just focus on who you are here to serve. Don't worry about the people who said you couldn't do the things. You've proved them wrong. Okay. You've made your point. They probably don't even know that you were holding this against them. And I was like, literally writing it down. Barbara said in 1992, you're a single mother, special needs child, and you're never going to amount to anything, right? I'm like, okay, Barbara, I'm going to do it. Right. So I forgive those people. I forgive them so that I can continue to move forward. So I know we only have about 9 minutes left, but you got to tell us about the story of the sausage, right? Because you start the two tales of the sausage, because you start the chapters after chapter 1, you kind of start off with that at the beginning of each chapter. So now look, just tell us a little bit, because we want them to buy the book, Forgiveness Made Easy. We need you to buy the book, right? Because you need to read it so that you can begin your journey with forgiving others. But tell us about that. Two tales of the sausage.
Yeah, the tale of two sausages. Yeah, it is based on a true story that happened in my own household, and I broke it up and used it as an introduction to quite a few of the chapters, because I wanted to encourage people to keep reading. Also, because forgiveness is quite a deep subject. It can be quite heavy for people, and although I do have a good sense of humor, and I try to be light-hearted with it without being disrespectful or irreverent, or a little bit irreverent, but just because I want to make it human. Like, we all do hold resentments. It's not pretty when we look in our own hearts. Sometimes we've got old stuff stored there that's going off. It's a bit whiffy. We should have taken the bins out quite a long time ago, but it's still in there. No one's perfect. So I was trying to be a little bit lighthearted and appeal to our inner child, where you can see the ridiculousness of holding a resentment, and the stories of this family. And one Christmas dinner, the father, like, thinking that his daughter has finished what she's going to eat, but she's actually put the last two little sausages on her plate as her favorite thing, saving the best till last. He eats them, and then she literally does not forgive him. And this is a true story from my family household, where my sister, it wasn't me, it was my sister, would repeatedly bring that resentment up every single time we had dinner at Christmas from that moment on. And it became a family joke. like the whole sausage thing, like she never forgave my dad for it. And so I was using it as an example of the kinds of petty things, because often the stories of forgiveness that we hear are so powerful and so inspiring, but often they're not relatable, because some people have experienced grave abuses as children, sexual abuse, violence, emotional abuse, mental abuse, or trauma, a parent dies, a sibling dies, that kind of thing. And if you haven't had that experience yourself, you can't really relate. Well, you think, well, I don't probably need to forgive very much at all. I didn't have that experience. And so there are these stories that are amazing. Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, all these amazing leaders who forgave. The Dalai Lama, refuses to hold any ill will against the Chinese who've exiled him. Amazing. But what about every day? My husband won't, put the lid back on the toothpaste, and my child is like really annoying, teenager, or, like the everyday thing. And so that's what I was trying to point to with the little grievance of the family, where this tiny weeny little incident that happened that literally got brought up every single Christmas dinner, every single Christmas, and it was just to illustrate the fact that we can be like that. And that their resentments, they are, the little things that build up in between us. And sometimes when big things happen, like there's a death, you realize actually most of that, there's only this one thing really maybe I didn't get seen, maybe I didn't get support I needed. And then you would have the conversation with the person about that. But a lot of the stuff, no one wants to know that. When I was doing forgiveness work on my mum, and this was significant, I did forgiveness work on my mum because she had multiple sclerosis. And so she was ill from the time I was 15. She wasn't being my mum anymore. At 18, I took a year off university. I looked after her, so it's like that kind of change has a really big impact. But I was resenting her for things like wearing pop socks. That's just her fashion sense. That's, and so I don't need to tell her about all of that. I just need to actually admit that what I couldn't forgive, the reason I found it hard to forgive my resentment, was because I didn't recognize it for what it was. I didn't recognize it was resentment because it was acting like protection over my heart for losing my mum, even though she was still alive. So the woman in the wheelchair wasn't really being my mum. But at the same time, I was able to not grieve. I talk a lot about this at the moment, that grief and forgiveness are like siblings. They often come together. We find it hard to forgive something because it means that then our hearts are open and we'll need to grieve it. Or we can't grieve because there's something we haven't forgiven. That there may be, like, although your beloved person has died, they might have left you in a financial mess, or you might have really had a difficult 5 years of their illness and you've been the one who's holding it together. So there may be resentment about that. Because we're such lovely people, we don't even like to admit that to ourselves, let alone anyone else. And so again, my invitation is for us to get really honest about the work that we need to do and then do it.
I love it. And I want to read this sentence from your book that really ties into what you've been saying. So you'll recognize this because it's your book, but it's so, so powerful because you've been talking about, death, and you've been talking about illness, right? Dementia is one of those conditions that's very debilitating. It can really have an impact on the person who's experiencing the illness, but also the caregivers, the family members. So this is the quote: "One of the greatest motivations for forgiveness is knowing that it's you who will be the primary beneficiary when you do it. Forgiveness is for you." That's so powerful. And every time I read it, I really started to tear up a little bit because that one sentence is powerful. You will be the primary beneficiary. It takes it back to you. You're trying to resolve the thing for you.
Yeah, you're the one who gets set free. And the good thing about that, it also means that when you get to your deathbed, that you are there with a free heart. You don't have any regrets. There's nothing on your mind. You're just kind of ready to meet your maker or whatever it is your beliefs are. But it's just like you're feeling open and available. And to me, this is the important. It's for you because, like I said, it's your heart. And do you want your heart full of love, or do you want it full of resentment? They're your choices, basically. And to really choose to leave your resentment at the door is a very powerful act, and it frees you up. It is the weight, like you were saying about the weight in your heart. You're letting that go. And the potential of it is the other thing that I think is worth mentioning, because I'm passionate about the potential of forgiveness. Because if you imagine that every person around the world did their forgiveness work, then we would be living in a completely different world. Where would the wars be if everybody has forgiven everyone? And so the potential of it is just utterly mind-blowing. And some people have called me naive, but I don't care. I've forgiven them. But also, you then have to ask, so why don't we? So it must be that the resentment is so delicious and so addictive and so powerful that we cannot see why this is better.
Oh, this is so heavy, but it's so powerful. And I think if you just take one step toward the forgiveness journey,
Yep.
the universe will meet you there and carry you on the journey.
Yeah. And what's amazing is that when you do your forgiveness work, imagine you're in a dance and you're stuck. You do your forgiveness work. So something moves. Weirdly, the other person seems to change. And I can't tell you how many times I do forgiveness work with somebody and they come back to me like a week later and go, "You'll never guess what." And I say, "I probably will." And they say, "So and so contacted me," or "We had a much easier time," or "I bumped into my ex at a wedding and it was fine." That kind of thing. That's the power of doing your work.
I love it. So tell our listening viewing audience where they can get their own copy of Forgiveness Made Easy.
Yeah, well, it's available on Amazon, I'm afraid, but all three different, it's available as an audio, so I'm reading it. So if you like to listen, it's also an ebook, also a print book. And I also host online forgiveness fields, which is like a practice place where people can come and do a little bit of forgiveness practice. So I always recommend people start keeping a list of things and people that they need to forgive, and then come, and I hold them once a month, and we actually practice together, a bit like you practice yoga together, or do a dance together. It's just a place to practice, so that you get the feeling of, well, how can I, oh, this is a bit odd, this thing. So like that.
This has been such an amazing conversation. I'm so honored to have this just 30-minute opportunity to chat with you about your book. And I know that it may seem like a hard journey to get others to forgive, but I believe if we can get more folks to forgive, the world will be a better place for us all. Because when I think about some of the things that happen in the world, I wonder, is it someone that they needed to forgive, or did they need to forgive themselves, but they didn't, and it now has impacted us all in some shape, form, or fashion because we're watching it play out on TV, right?
Exactly. That is what happens when you don't let go of resentment. Exactly. The experience that we're having globally is we're watching people's resentment play out, and it's a choice. And that's the thing. Peace is a choice. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, "Without forgiveness, there really is no future." And I really believe that is true. I am absolutely on a mission to make forgiveness interesting, popular, accessible, doable, because I believe in the potential of it to utterly transform our relationship with each other. And therefore, with, humanity could change. We could evolve in the ways that we need to evolve, where we start looking at us as one humanity. How do we make the world work for everyone? That has to be our big question. Not, am I okay? How do I make the world work for everyone? So the last thing that I'll say really is just, your forgiveness is an act of amnesty for humanity. Although it's you and you're the primary beneficiary, you are also adding to a forgiveness field, to the field that already exists. And that's why it's such a powerful practice.
Wow. A year from now, we're going to have to figure out, have we moved the needle for forgiveness? What are we going to see play out on TV? That,
Yeah.
That we'll wait and see, right?
Yeah. It may be a slow burn, but it's work, work worth doing.
Absolutely. Well, listen, everyone, this has been another amazing episode, 52 Authors, 52 Weeks. I am here with Barbara J. Hunt, author of Forgiveness Made Easier. This journey is definitely for all persons, no matter where you come from, who you know, what you do, it is for all of us. So thank you so much.
Such a pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Lisa.